In this episode of the Bannerlord Perks Guide, we will look at throwing skill perks. By the end of this video, you will have a complete understanding of what each one does and which to pick based on your specific needs. I put timestamps in the description for your convenience, and without further ado, let's get started. Quick Draw. This perk increases drawing speed by 20% for throwing weapons, which we can see from the testing is, well, basically nothing. I tested reload speed after tossing as well as switching between weapons, but all were identical nearly to the frame. Perhaps they meant you can draw pictures with your throwing weapons faster. If a 20% increase made zero difference, then it's safe to assume the Captain perk giving 10% increase for troops is equally nothing. Shield Breaker. Dealing 40% more damage to shields with throwing weapons can be quite useful. In testing, it takes 4 hits without the perk to bust the shield, but only 3 hits with the perk. The Captain perk dealing 8% more damage to shields for our troops seems weak at first, but keep in mind if we have an infantry formation of 150 troops that each have javelins, it can add up to a massive difference. Since Quick Draw seems to have no effect whatsoever, the pick is Shield Breaker on both accounts. Flexible Fighter. We can use our throwing weapons as melee if we press X, switching to melee mode. This perk increases damage done by 10% while in melee mode. We can see in testing the bonus damage increases from 2 on average to 9. Javelins use the polearm skill and throwing axes use the one-handed skill, so damage can be increased by perks from those skill trees as well. The Captain perk gives a plus 15 to all control and vigor skills. This is an interesting one for sure, as it has utility with every single troop in the game. Hunter. This perk gives a 40% increase in damage against horses, which is huge. We can see from the testing that without the perk, bonus damage averages to 2.5 per hit, and with the perk, 43.5. If we take into consideration a horse charging towards us, it's nearly guaranteed to dismount any cavalry unit with a high damage javelin. The Captain perk only gives an 8% increase. We can't use the same logic as previously because the AI rarely hits enemy horses, so this perk is mostly wasted. For our main character, I prefer Hunter, but if you plan on using your throwing weapons in melee mode a lot, then Flexible Fighter can be helpful. For the Captain perk, Flexible Fighter is the pick and it's not even close. Mounted Skirmisher. Here we go again, another mounted accuracy perk test. We can see traveling in a straight line, there is literally no difference until your aim is held for about 5 seconds, and even then the difference is really small. It's also difficult to see any difference when moving a horse from left to right. The Captain perk gives mounted troops with throwing weapons a 10% damage increase. This is a pretty good increase since throwing weapons already do high damage to begin with. Perfect Technique. With this perk, projectile speed increases by 25%, which is a big number. And fortunately for us, we can see a massive difference between with and without the perk. There are 2 things to note here. Projectile speed dictates how far we can throw, and faster projectiles do more damage. If we aim at the same place we did without the perk, we overshoot the target by a significant amount, meaning we don't have to arc our throws nearly as much. Damage also increases from 46.5 on average without to 71 with the perk, which is a 52% increase. The Captain perk gives our troops a 10% increase to throwing speed, which is great for the same reasons stated above. I can confidently tell you the pick here for both our main and Captain perk is Perfect Technique. This perk is really amazing because it increases our accuracy, range, and damage, and we can pick it all up at level 75. Thank you, Tail Worlds. Knock Off. Another dismounting perk, I love these. This one activates 50% of the time when dealing over 25% damage. The numbers are great here. We can see in our testing that it works as described. The Captain perk seems a little weak as 5% more damage against cavalry with throwing weapons is not much, especially when considering how few times I've seen a javelin take them out. Running Throw. As we stated before, gaining additional projectile speed is really good since it increases both range and damage. This perk gives a bonus to projectile speed from our movement speed. It's difficult to judge movement speed of the projectile just by eyeballing it, so I decided to test relative move speed with and without the perk. I ran 5 tests each, and without the perk averaged to roughly 34.5 meters per second without and 36 meters per second with the perk, which is a reasonable increase. The Captain perk increases throwing skill of troops by 30, which is a huge bonus. The pick for our main character is tough since they're both very useful. I personally prefer running throw as I find late game javelins will one-shot almost anything, so knockoff would be wasted for late game builds. For the Captain perk, I also prefer running throw as increasing throwing skill will give bonus to several stats, not just damage like the other perk. Skirmisher. This perk reduces incoming damage by 10%. We can see from testing that without the perk, rocks do anywhere from 10 to 13 damage, and with the perk, only between 7 and 9 damage. The Captain perk does the same, but only 3%, which is small enough to be negligible. Well prepared. This perk increases the number of throwing weapons in each set. We can see from testing that carrying 4 sets will go from having 20 in total to 24 with the perk. The secondary perk is tagged as Party Leader, which will give all of our ranged troops a 25% chance to have an extra shot. So with 100 archers, we can expect to have an extra 25 shots in total on average, which is better than nothing, I suppose. This pick may be subjective, but I'm finding it difficult to find a reason for picking Skirmisher over Well Prepared. Throwing weapons usually come in a pack of 3 to 5 each, so adding +1 to each pack is a massive increase, making my pick Well Prepared. For the Captain perk, Skirmisher is the only option. Focus. Being able to zoom in for throwing weapons seems odd since the range is so short. It's probably more useful for scouting out positions and seeing the battlefield more clearly than for aiming. We can see a slight increase in zoom with the perk. The Governor perk adds +1 to settlement security, which is great for stabilizing a recent conquest. Last hit. This perk is a bit of an odd one, dealing 50% more damage to enemies who are less than 50% health. For most throwing weapons, this will be negligible as damage is rarely an issue for mid to late game equipment. However, if you're using throwing axes or low tier javelins, I did notice quite a big difference and one that would help a lot, particularly against armored targets who have taken a lot of damage already. Without the perk, most hits were around 60 to 70 damage. With the perk, this damage shoots up to well over 100 on average. Again, low tier troops, this would be irrelevant, but against higher tier troops with HP perks and higher armor, this can really make a difference. The secondary perk is tagged as Party Leader and increases the morale of troops in our party by 5. It's not a massive bonus, but it will always be on and can help a lot with lower tier troops. I don't find zoom to be helpful enough to justify a pick here, so we go with last hit for the main character. Focus is the only option for the Governor pick. Headhunter. Another 50% headshot damage increased perk. I do like these, although for throwing I find them less useful given the raw damage from javelins. In our testing, we see the throwing axe being just shy of a one-shot with each hit. With the perk, there's more than enough to one-shot every time though. The secondary perk reduces the recruiting costs of all troops except for tier 1. This perk can save quite a lot since it works for all troop types and is tagged as the Party Leader. Throwing competition. This perk is currently bugged as it not only gives a 20% discount for infantry upgrades, but actually gives a discount to all troop upgrades. This can have a massive impact as recruiting a troop from tier 1 and upgrading them to tier 5 will incur a total cost of 190 dinars. If we have an army of 500 troops, this equates to 95,000 dinars in total upgrades. With a 20% savings, this would mean a 19,000 dinar discount. The Governor perk gives 0.5 militia per day, which seems weak for a high tier perk. This is a tough pick. If you need the extra damage, then Headhunter is great because it will also save you some dinars. If damage isn't an issue, then I think you will get more utility out of throwing competition. That is also the only pick for Governor. Saddlebags. This perk gives us +2 ammunition per pack for throwing weapons if we start the battle with a mount. We can see from testing that without the perk, we start with 4 packs for a total of 20, and with the perk, 28 javelins. The secondary perk is tagged as Party Leader and adds 1 XP to infantry only per day. I tested all units and it doesn't work for cavalry or archers. Splinters. Throwing axes are an odd weapon group as the damage and stack size is low, making me wonder why anyone would use them to begin with over a javelin. This perk gives triple damage to shields, taking the hits from 7 without the perk to 3 with. The Captain perk gives 50% increase in damage to shields with throwing weapons, which seems like a mistake and should be from throwing axes only. This is a great pickup while it lasts. The picks here are easy. For our main character, Saddlebags. Just make sure you start on horse, as you can always dismount immediately and continue on foot if you wish. Splinters is amazing for Captain perk, and I highly recommend aiming for this one on companions. Long reach. Being able to pick up weapons from the floor is an interesting perk as it allows us to replenish our javelins without having to dismount. Keep in mind, any javelins we find on the floor will replenish our javelin stack even though the javelin type may not match. So a tier 2 troops javelins will indeed restock our tier 6 custom crafted javelin ammunition. The secondary perk is tagged Party Leader and gives a 20% bonus to morale and renown gain after battles. This is a nice perk to have, although this late in the perk tree it's probably not as useful. Resourceful. This perk gives a straight +2 ammunition to our throwing weapon stacks. We can see from testing with 4 stacks without the perk, we start at 18 total, and with the perk, that goes up to 26 total. The secondary perk gives a 10% bonus to XP for all throwing weapon troops. This is also tagged as party leader, making it useful for our main character. Throwing weapon troops are generally infantry or skirmisher cavalry, so this can be incredibly helpful when leveling up those unit types. This is a difficult pick since they effectively do the same thing when it comes to increasing our ammunition, except one is guaranteed and the other requires us to scavenge from the fallen. I lean towards Resourceful since I would rather have the +2 to start with, and the XP for infantry is really good to have. But there is a real argument to be made for picking long reach as well. In a very long fight, we could easily sustain our throwing weapons by scavenging between reinforcement waves and keeping us in the fight. Impale. I'm just going to come right out and say it. This is my pick. We will still look at the other perk, but be aware this pick is triple S tier. With this perk, we essentially become a mobile ballista, which is able to deliver damage through any shield. The enemy will no longer be able to block anything, and it's guaranteed casualty. Not only that, but there's an immense satisfaction to be had from watching bodies ragdoll after we impale them. Sorry, I'm too enamored with the main perk to even notice a 10% increase to throwing weapons for the captain perk. Weak spot. Ignoring armor is good, and 30% is nothing to be taken lightly. We can see from the testing, damage absorbed without the perk averaged to 29 per hit, and with the perk, all the way down to 14. The captain perk gives our troops with throwing weapons a 10% reduction to enemy armor, which can be great against higher tier troops that have good armor. If it wasn't already obvious, the pick for our main character is Impale. The captain perk needs a little more consideration though. I think the extra damage is more useful since it helps against both low tier and higher tier troops, whereas armor reduction almost exclusively helps against higher tier troops, so Impale is the pick here as well. Unstoppable force. The final perk increases both projectile speed and damage with throwing weapons. As stated earlier, projectile speed helps to increase our range, accuracy, and damage. We can see almost no difference in throwing rate between 275 with and without the perk, as well as 330. Level 0 is a bit slower, but that is most likely due to perk selection. We can see the real difference in the second part where we test for damage. At level 0, we do just enough damage to one-shot everything with high-end javelins. Level 275 without the perk, this increases to 150 to 175. 275 with the perk, it jumps again to 200 to 275 per hit, and 330 with the perk from 315 to 350. While having the damage is nice, I don't think it's worth aiming for 275 for. Javelins are devastating without the bonus damage from the final perk, so I think the focus points and attribute points are best spent elsewhere. Be sure to hit level 250 though. We are nearing the end of the video, which means it's time for the bonus. Vlad's a Pesh. As we all know, Impale is the most fun perk in the game, so it makes sense to do the bonus around this perk. And when we think about impaling people, nobody stands out more than Vlad the Impaler. We are about 500 years too early in Bannerlord, nonetheless we will be impaling people left and right, making our enemies think twice about resisting. The perks are fairly straightforward here, with the most important ones being perfect technique for more accurate throws, and well prepared, saddlebags, and resourceful for extra throwing ammunition. With these 3 perks, a single pack of 5 javelins will now spawn with 10, doubling our total. And finally, if it wasn't obvious, Impale. The throwing perks are fairly straightforward, so it was difficult coming up with some interesting combinations of perks. But what I would like to do instead for this one is show you some alternative tactics using this build. The first and most obvious scenario is taking out shield walls. To demonstrate this perfectly, we can solo a Sea Raider hideout without taking a single scratch. We even fight the mob at the end instead of a 1 versus 1. Having a shield and 30 javelins is incredibly potent. The second scenario is how we approach large battles. The best tactic here is to go for high value targets, enemy nobles, and higher tier cavalry. We likely won't need a shield here, so we can start with 40 javelins to throw. We immediately circle through to the rear of the enemy and wreak havoc on the nobles. In this case, they are all alone and only have a bow, but in most cases they will be surrounded by infantry and on horseback, making them difficult targets. But because we can bypass the shields, we can easily pick them off while doing a drive-by. Afterwards, we take out as many high tier cavalry as we can. When we run low, we can easily scavenge javelins javelins from fallen troops, or use our own companions as a resupply. My initial plan was to have a squad of 9 companions, all with Impale, but unfortunately Tailwolves ruined this by messing up their aim, and every single throw sails far above the enemy's head, even when they're 5 ranks deep. Very disappointing to say the least. The third scenario is for offensive sieges, in which there is no time to knock the walls down. We start by immediately retreating all troops from the battle and continue circling near the rear of the map. Once our troops are gone, the enemy will sally out and try to take us down. The AI, in their brilliance, forgets to lock the door behind them when they leave, so we swoop in and close the gates, locking all melee troops out. Now we can take our time and pick off the ranged defenders. In this case, bow or crossbow would be more efficient here since we can reload from the arrow barrels, but even with javelins we can reduce the ranged defenders, then retreat and attack again with significantly less ranged defenders on the walls. The final scenario, which is my personal favorite, is the offensive siege advanced parkour shenanigans. This tactic requires that we knock down at least one wall before we assault. Once through the breach, we can work our way up the stairs and start taking out high value targets like enemy archers. This will save our army from sustaining significant casualties. I like to remain on horseback here since it allows us to escape quickly if need be, but going on foot can be good as well. A quick reminder, switching from melee to ranged mode can come in handy. If you want to help me out, don't forget to stab that like button before you leave. If you want to see more videos and guides just like this, consider subscribing. Let me know in the comment section below what topic you would like to see covered on the channel. Up next, we will be looking at all of the riding perks. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.